next topic, embedding and subsetting. So I think this is something that probably a lot of people know. So I can go quite quickly, I guess. I just want to show one or two things so you understand exactly what is behind that. A good PDF contains fonts. Definitely, it's a self-contained format, so you can exchange that with somebody that doesn't have the same authoring tool than you have, doesn't have the fonts, the images, whatever, all of the external resources needed. And this is why PDF has been invented. One of the reasons, let's say. So that means that if you want your PDF to be completely correct and good and easy to use, then you have to add fonts to the PDF. And how do you add fonts? You add font by embedding them. So as David already explained, it's not a file that stays somewhere and it's a link to a file. It's really some mechanism that takes the information within the font file and input the information into the PDF. And this is called embedding. There are two ways to embed a font. It could be a complete set. That means it's all of the glyphs of the font, or it's a subset. When you actually export a PDF in the advanced section, this is where you deal with fonts. So it's correctly set up here, and it's now correctly set up by default, which is good. And here what you see is something that says subset fonts when % of characters used is less than 100%. And this is a good setting because that means that if you have that setting, I would say that almost every time you will get a subset of your font, because if you don't have 100% of all of the characters, which means all of the things that you have within your font, then it will be subset. Anyway, if you have 100%, it's a complete set that you will subset. So it's a complete embedding anyway. So this is normally the setting that you would use to subset the font, and I will explain later on why you have to subset. There are very few cases where subset is not ideal and the complete embedding is better. And this is a topic that has been covered last time, so you can find that on YouTube as well. If you use like 0% here, that means that you never want to subset and you want to have the complete font, which you have to be aware that it doesn't always work. Sometimes you ask for this, but you still get a subset. And by the way, the opposite as well, but that's very unusual cases. Be careful if you embed completely a font. That means that you have the weight of that font in your PDF. That means that if you're using like the Arial Unicode that contains a lot of languages inside and I don't know, thousands of characters, then you're going to end up with a PDF that is going to weigh over 150 megabytes, even if you only have like 2 words in it. Something that is really important is that you should never, ever use another number than 0 or 100, like 50%, for example, because in that case, you never know what is going to happen. Let's take an example. You say, for example, I don't know, 20%. You want to subset if it's only up to 20%, and afterwards you want to have a complete. You make a first version of your file, and for some reason you have some text and you are at 19%. Then your font is going to be subset. Your client asked afterwards to make corrections, and you add some text, you add other stuff, and then your font is, I don't know, 21% that time. And then you will get a font that is completely embedded. That means that with the same file and the same settings for exporting the PDF, you get, let's say, 2 flavors of the PDF, and sometimes it can lead to problem and say, I don't understand, that file used to work, and no, I just change 2 lines of text and the file doesn't work anymore. It could come from those settings. So never use that. Oh, that's something here. You wanted to say something, David?
No.
Okay. Here you also have a line that says an information box said all fonts with appropriate embedding bits will be embedded. And again, we come back to the fact that the font is a piece of software that you have legal copyrighted licensing. And especially like here, this is a font that I opened in FontLab just to get those information on the legal. And as you can see at the bottom of the screen, this is where you have some information where if the person that has designed the font has unchecked the allow subsetting, for example, it will always be a complete set of the font. And this is why sometime you could say, I want to have a subset and I get something else. It's because that the designer has made other choices for you. By here, as you can see, the embedding, it says that the editing of the document is allowed. But if I click there, then I can get something else. And you can have other settings. And one that is very important is embedding of this font is not allowed. Somebody can design a font and say, you can use that font. You can use it in InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, Quark Express, whatever. But if you make a PDF, you will not be able to embed that font. So even though you ask for embedding the font will not be in the PDF. And that obviously generates problems. And I'll show you just quickly afterwards what is the results. Why do we have to subset the fonts, as I said before? Is actually because, as you can see here, the name of the font, the original name is Source Sans Pro Regular. And actually, when I make a subset, that generates a unique name. You see those codes in front of the name of the font, and that ensures that this name is unique. And then afterwards, later in the process, like when you rip, you are sure that the way the rip has been set up, for example, where sometimes, and again, in the past, it was quite usual because of speed issues and size, etc. The rip was, for example, saying that if there is a font in the PDF that is already on my hard drive, I will use mine instead of the one that is in the PDF. And this is what can lead, to some problems like character missing or a character in place of another one, etc. So here, by doing the subset, you generate a unique name, which means that if you go on the RIP, and even the RIP has the setting, if I find the same font that I have on my hard drive, I use mine, it will never find that one because that name, as being unique, will not be in the hard drive. So that's really a way to ensure that the font that is used when you print is the font that was embedded in your PDF, meaning exactly the one that you wanted to use. Let me show you quickly. I did actually, I modified the Zapfino with FontLab and just change actually in the legal, just change like the embedding of this font is not allowed. And I actually just renamed it cannot embed. And in InDesign, I use that font to, as you can see here, I use the font cannot embed. And I have some text here. And if I export that file here, even if here I said I want to subset the font and I want to embed, I do my exports, and you've seen that quickly here. I got a warning. It just says this font cannot be embedded due to licensing restriction, which means that even though I asked to have the embed of the font, this is the result of my file, where actually the font has not been embedded. And I can check that if I go here. This is a true type custom, but actually what has been used, that multiple master, this is what this means, Adobe Serif multiple master. So the font that David talked about some minutes ago, and it just used that font, and that font has been designed to actually, by having the metrics being able to move into all of the direction, to show something that looks like what you had at the first place, which actually here didn't work at all. That's it for me on that part.
Okay, so
Any
one
questions?
quick question about so fonts are copyrighted software. Is it legal to add a font in a PDF and modify it afterwards? Is that legal or not?
Yeah, so that's the funny thing that we had at some point, like Adobe allowed to do that, and then afterwards remember that he was designing a lot of fonts and then said you cannot do that anymore, and then finally you can do that if you have the font on your hard drive, which means you can make the modification if you already have the font, but not by using the font that is inside the PDF. And this is why we had several messages over the time in Pitstop Pro, for example, where it was easy to do at first, it wasn't possible afterwards. And finally now, when you want to do this, you'll get a message from Pitstop saying that basically it says, technically I can do it, but it's up to you to check if you have the right to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that technically it's possible. It's not always legal to do it, and it's up to you to know. So basically you have the font, you can. You never add that font, you're not supposed to make the changes.